I blew a kiss to my husband's worst enemy. For 8 months, my mafia boss husband acted like I didn't exist. So I walked right into the rival capo's ballroom in a blood-red dress. The moment my husband dragged me out by the wrist, I knew I just started a mob war.
Welcome back to The Late Shift. You and I have both seen what happens when a soul gets pushed past the breaking point. To truly understand Ravenna, we need to witness the exact second she gives up on this toxic marriage. For 8 suffocating months, she played the devoted wife to Santino Valerii, a ruthless boss who handles affection like an active grenade. When he gives her the ultimate cold shoulder, she sheds no tears. Instead, a quiet terror is born. She slips into a forbidden red dress, bringing a slash of danger into his sterile world. She becomes the ticking time bomb he always feared. Here is a truth to carry with you. Genuine rebellion never screams. It simply opens its eyes and stares back with absolute, freezing clarity. The silence in the dining room is heavy enough to choke on. Before a person completely loses their mind, they try desperately to force some kind of order onto their world. Look at Ravenna, spending 40 agonizing minutes obsessing over this massive table, lining up crystal, glasses, and folding heavy napkins into perfectly identical triangles. It is the frantic energy of a woman drowning in domestic misery. After her 8 months of being a literal captive, pretending to be a wife, her dinner setup has no romantic candles, no soft flowers. It is just cold, hard, expensive plates. 2 heavy chairs sit miles apart at opposite ends of the room. A simple lesson for the night. The physical distance in a room will always reveal the massive emotional wasteland lying between 2 people. This entire house operates like a silent enemy in the dark. The Valerii estate, sitting 40 minutes north of Chicago, is not a home. It is an isolation chamber. The sprawling floor plan is a weapon Santino designed so they never accidentally cross paths. At first, Roth herself calling it a lie to herself, calling it an adjustment phase. Listen closely. Never lie to yourself when a relationship feels suspiciously like pure fear. He sleeps in the freezing guest wing, tossing her the massive master bedroom like a scrap to a stray. When he completely ignores the meal she cooked, she remains glued to her seat. The silent maids drift around her like ghosts, ensuring every interaction is delayed, sterile, and entirely stripped of any real human warmth. In the shadows of these mafia families, ironclad rules always replace actual affection. Ravenna sits paralyzed, her fingers twisting a wedding ring that digs deep into her skin. She absorbs the pain in total silence, a perfect reflection of her suffocating reality. Suddenly, car headlights slash through the dark room. The untouched dinner has gone completely cold. Heavy boots echo down the hall, and Santino waves off his armed men with 2 sharp words. Watch how her spine snaps straight the second she hears his voice. That is not respect. That is the hardwired flinch of prey spotting a predator. He fills the doorway, scanning the room for threats before bothering to look at his wife. The lesson here is brutal but necessary. Never confuse pure fear with genuine respect. Over the past 8 months, the sheer terror of the Valerii name had soaked deep into her bones. She watched hardened men drop their voices into nervous whispers whenever he walked past. The whole city was trained to fear his family, and she only survived by ignoring the violence that paid for their life. Here is a dark piece of wisdom. Sometimes playing completely blind is the only way to survive a waking nightmare. Santino ran his criminal empire and his house with the exact same iron fist, demanding total dominance. Standing right there in the dim dining room, his dark eyes drag over her perfectly set table. He finds no warmth in her effort. He sees her care as a fatal weakness, turning his back toward the stairs without a single word. Absolute ice. We have all been there, haven't we? Pure desperation will always push us to do incredibly foolish. Ravenna actually calls out to him, taking a fragile shot at clawing back just a tiny crumb of dignity. Santino stops on the dark stairs, completely frozen, yet he refuses to give her the basic human decency of turning around. "I have work," he says. 3 heavy words delivered like a judge slamming a gavel. It is a massive slap in the face, stacking on top of every locked door she has faced for months. You can feel the sick knot of Huflesen twisting in her stomach. A tragic life lesson. The biggest mistake you can make is expecting a monster to suddenly grow a heart. Driven by that agonizing need to be noticed, she forces her shaking legs up the dim stairs. The door to his private office is solid mahogany, designed to crush the confidence of anyone standing outside. Ravenna shatters the unwritten rules of his world and barges right in. Santino is entrenched behind a massive desk, the harsh glow of a lamp cutting vicious shadows across his sharp features. The pitch-black night presses against the window behind him. He looks up, hitting her with a hollow stare meant to make her feel like a stranger in her own home. Her voice shakes, but she reminds him she is his wife, while she bleeds out while she bleeds out emotionally. Remember this, the real devil never needs to raise his voice. Santino uses absolute silence as his weapon. He takes a slow sip of his whiskey, waiting for the dead quiet to crush her resolve. Let us take a moment to appreciate the tension of this standoff together. He fully expects her to fold under his toxic presence and run away. But she holds her ground. She steps deeper into the lion den, closing the gap until the air between them sparks. Up close, his scent is overwhelming, expensive cologne, sharp liquor, and the exhaustion of a man who sleeps with one eye open. It takes all her remaining courage to reach her hand out. It is a desperate plea for connection. His reaction is lightning fast and violently cold. He dodges her touch like her fingers are coated in poison. Her empty hand just hangs there in the freezing air. In a shattered whisper, she asks why they are doing this, the lesson. Never beg for a connection, someone flat out refuses to give. She knows exactly what she is to this family. A living poker chip traded to settle a massive debt. But even a pawn deserves to know the rules of the game. Her voice cracks as she demands to know why he would buy a wife just to starve her soul. For a split second, his tough exterior actually falters. A muscle jumps in his jaw, the tiniest crack in his stone face before he locks it down. "Go to sleep," he growls, his voice vibrating with pure danger. But she stands her ground, and the monster finally leans in. The shadows swallow half his face. He locks onto her with dead eyes and delivers the fatal blow. He tells her, completely deadpan, that he never wanted her in his bed anyway. Life lesson: physical pain heals, but freezing cold rejection can permanently destroy a person. A true villain never softens the blow. He twists the knife slow, just to watch the tragedy unfold. That nasty rejection hits her in the chest like a sniper round. You can see the hot tears welling up, the shaky breathing of someone 1 second away from a total mental collapse. But right here, dangling over the edge, something incredible happens. Her deep survival instinct kicks in, handing her the most brutal life lesson of all. If you want to beat the devil, you absolutely cannot let him see you bleed. She realizes her tears are the exact prize he wants to claim. So, she chokes down the sob burning in her throat. She straightens her spine, locking all that agony deep inside. Giving him zero satisfaction, she turns her back and walks out the door. She floats down the dark hallway like a ghost. Her face is frozen into a flawless mask, even though her entire reality is burning to ash inside her head. The heavy door of the master bedroom clicks shut, and the dead silence swallows her alive. She stands paralyzed while his cruel insult plays on a sick loop in her brain. But as the clock ticks, all that crushing humiliation starts to boil. It turns radioactive. Her deep sadness mutates into a blinding, savage desire for payback. This is the exact moment the victim transforms into the ultimate threat. She drops to her knees, digging into the back of her closet to find a piece of fabric he banned months ago. Take this to heart. Hitting rock bottom is never the end. It is just a launch pad for an absolutely legendary comeback. Stay with me for this final moment, because it is pure poetry. She holds up that forbidden red dress. She bought this back in her past life, when she still owned her soul, long before some arrogant crime lord tried to control her breathing. Banning this dress was never about the color. It was a sick power play to erase her free will. Now, she slides that silk on like she is suiting up for war. She glares into the mirror, zipping it up with the cold swagger of a woman who finally realizes nobody is coming to save her. She pulls out a lipstick, the exact shade of fresh blood. Painting it on is a literal war cry. She is leaving that room as a completely unhinged threat. A final lesson for the night. When the world refuses to be your hero, you have to become your own beautiful monster. Welcome back, late-night listeners. We are dropping right into the quietest, most dangerous kind of heartbreak. Picture her staring into the glass, wiping away the last tear she will ever shed for a husband who treats her like a ghost. You and I both know that look. The warmth in her eyes just freezes over. It is a heavy truth we all learn eventually. A neglected heart is vastly more lethal than a loaded firearm. She calls Tavi her fiercely loyal best friend. But that quiet peace shatters. The second Ravenna asks for the address to the arson Korvax gala. The silence on the line is heavy enough to break the floorboards. Tavi practically chokes on her breath. Even her absolute bravest friend knows that walking into that rival mafia mansion is signing a death warrant. Tavi shakes off the panic, promising to meet Ravina at Lincoln Park in 40 minutes. And then we witness the tragic metamorphosis. Ravina slips into a blood-red silk dress. This is not just fabric, friends. This is a battle standard raised high after 8 agonizing months of being treated like dust in her own marriage. She was a fading ghost wandering those cold penthouse halls. Tonight, that crimson silk is doing the talking. She flashes a haunting, empty smile into the mirror. The tears are gone, replaced by a chilling dominance. Here is a lesson for the midnight hours. Sometimes the worst agony you endure hardens into your strongest armor. She is taking the raw, bleeding pieces of her heartbreak and forging them into an absolute weapon. Her husband, Santino Valerius, tossed her aside. Tonight, he learns the heavy price of pushing a loyal soul into the dark. The cab pulls up to the towering iron gates at Lincoln Park, tires hissing against rain-slicked pavement. Tavi reaches out, gripping Ravina by the hand, offering her one final chance to turn back. But Tavi is already smiling, ready for the chaos. Beside her, Ravina is quietly suffocating. Her heart is hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Yet, when she steps out of the car, her voice does not tremble once. It is a quiet reminder to all of us. Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is walking into the fire even when your hands are shaking. The cage door is finally wide open. Arson Korvax projects his dominance through this massive estate. Golden light bleeds into the cold night. 2 armed mountains of muscle block the doors, but Tavi smoothly talks them down like a pro. Stepping inside that ballroom feels like descending into a beautifully decorated purgatory. The lights are kept low, masking the dangerous eyes of the criminal underworld. Within seconds, Ravina spots 3 men who used to break bread at Santino's dining table. The terrifying shock melting across their faces is a tragic masterpiece. It teaches a brutal life lesson we cannot ignore. The very people you overlook and cast aside usually hold the power to dismantle your entire world. The forgotten wife just walked into enemy territory and claimed the throne. Stick with me here, because the apex predator of this room is making his move. Arsen Korvax glides toward her, offering a smile that never reaches his freezing eyes. He is a man who sees human beings only as collateral damage. Until tonight, Ravina only knew him as a terrifying rumor whispered during her husband's late-night phone calls. This walking nightmare extends a hand, bowing with dark theatricality. He greets her as Ravenna Valerius, playing the part of the stunned host. Her countermove is absolutely devastating. She takes his hand, meets his dead stare, and quietly gives him her maiden name, Ravenna Altieri. Reclaiming your own name is the ultimate assertion of freedom. With 2 simple words, she shatters the heavy iron chains of a dead, suffocating marriage. Reclaiming that name is a stunning rejection of her husband's protection. Arsen lets out a dark, amused laugh that cuts right through the tension. Beside her, Tavi digs her nails into Ravenna's arm, silently pleading with her to step back. But Ravenna crossed the point of no return the moment she zipped up that crimson silk. A melancholic melody drifts through the speakers, and Arsen extends his hand for a dance. Taking it means openly declaring a mob war. Every dangerous set of eyes is locked on them. It reveals a harsh reality of human nature. If you force someone to live in the shadows for too long, they will eventually set the house on fire just to be seen. They move together, though Arsen keeps a careful distance, knowing a close embrace would spark a brutal massacre. Ravina can feel 100 predators staring her down, but she keeps that tragic, beautiful smile in place. When you find yourself surrounded by wolves, unbreakable confidence is your only shield. But then, the fragile atmosphere in the room splinters. Tavi breathes a frantic warning, and the music vanishes from Ravenna's mind. The entire ballroom goes deathly quiet. We look to the grand entrance, and there he is. Santino Valerius, he stands there radiating a cold, demonic fury, his towering enforcer looming over his shoulder. He looks like a dark king stepping onto scorched earth. It is a bitter reminder that our most agonizing wounds always come from the ones closest to us. He completely ignores every rival gun pointed his way. He only sees his runaway wife. We can hear the gears in Santino's mind violently snapping. He absorbs the devastating image, the scandalous red dress, the defiant makeup, and his worst enemy holding his wife's waist. You and I can see the exact second his calculated, icy exterior shatters, his jaw locks so tight the bone might crack. His fists curl into wrecking balls. All of that brilliant mafia logic evaporates into raw, blinding jealousy. And Ravina, she drops a brilliant piece of psychological warfare. She looks deep into the storm of her husband's eyes, raises her hand, and blows him a mocking kiss. The ballroom forgets how to breathe. It is a dark lesson in control. Letting anger take the wheel always drives you straight into the abyss. Arsen simply smirks. The trap snaps shut, and the king angrily marches forward. Look at the sheer terror this man projects with nothing but a slow walk. Santino does not rush. He takes heavy steps, and the sea of criminals parts to avoid his path. He reaches Ravenna, his hand clamping around her wrist like an iron shackle. Arsen attempts to play the noble savior, stepping forward to intervene. But Santino turns his head, hitting him with a hollow, psychopathic stare that could freeze boiling water. It teaches us a profound truth. The absolute greatest displays of power never require a single spoken word. Arsen actually backs away, swallowing his pride in front of his men. Santino drags his wife out into the biting winter air. He throws her into the back of a black armored vehicle, slamming the heavy door hard enough to rock the entire frame. The driver slams the gas, tires screaming as the heavy vehicle tears into the night. Inside that reinforced cabin, the silence is thick enough to drown in. Ravina stares out the window, bracing for the emotional detonation. Beside her, the underworld king is rigidly still. His jaw is locked, a vein throbbing at his temple. The hand he used to drag her out rests on his knee, trembling from suppressed rage. Without turning his head, he asks if she has completely lost her mind. He aims for an icy, authoritative tone, but the deep fractures of sheer panic bleed through every syllable. It is a tragic lesson, listeners. The desperate attempt to control everything is often the very thing that breaks you down. He is drowning in a terrifying ocean of unspoken fear and bruised pride. With zero hesitation, she softly replies that she lost her mind 8 months ago, the day he forgot she existed. That truth hits him like a physical blow, snapping his gaze toward her. The eye contact inside that dark tomb is painfully electric. She feels the suffocating heat of his fury, his sharp cologne filling the cramped space. When he forces Arsen's name through his teeth, it sounds like an execution order. He is agonizing over the reality that she walked into his rival's arms. But she shatters his pride with an emotionless whisper. She tells him Arsen meant nothing. She simply chose the one blade she knew would cut Santino the deepest. It proves that the most fatal wounds do not require a weapon. Just the devastating, honest truth. The king is quietly bleeding out in front of her. The agonizing ride back to the family estate is a masterclass in psychological torture. It becomes a silent war to see who will break first. In the shadows, Santino pulls oxygen into his lungs like a wounded animal. Ravina can still feel the heat of his grip on her wrist, stinging like a fresh burn. The second the tires stop, the quiet shatters. He abandons her at the front doors, storming down the stone hallways. Ravina takes her time, trailing behind. We see a heartbreaking glimpse of an untouched anniversary dinner sitting on the table, a silent tombstone for a marriage that died of starvation. Listeners, neglecting what you love is the fastest way to turn it to ash. She steps into the dark library, finding him leaning heavily against a bookshelf, fighting to hold his fractured soul together. You and I are riding this late-night frequency together, and we need to unpack the heavy static of this room. The library feels like a tomb, heavy with the scent of decaying paper. Luca steps inside, the oak door shutting with a sharp click. That single sound makes her mob boss husband snap to attention, his spine locking like steel. He goes cold, listing every rule she shattered. The enemy territory. The forbidden kiss. But an apology. She cuts him down, simply noting that the king finally saw her red dress. That single phrase shatters his untouchable mask. His eyes go wide, his jaw trembling in the dark. It leaves us with this quiet-eyed. When we strip away our towering pride, watching someone fully terrified to their feelings is a deeply terrifying thing to witness. Let the piano roll in as we look at how this showdown is framed. Luca pulls off the ultimate survival tactic, refusing to take a single step back. She holds her ground, broadcasting that she sees right through his toxic games. Santino pushes forward, eating up the space until the room feels stripped of oxygen. That suffocating cedar scent of his wraps around her like a heavy drug. She can actually see the frantic pulse beating against his throat. The tension becomes a crushing weight on her ribs. It hits us with a tragic truth we all learn out here in the dark. We often sprint straight back into the fires that burn us, mistaking the deep ache of trauma for the pull of true love. She fiercely craves his dangerous touch and absolutely despises herself for that weakness. Step into the midnight shadows and watch this monster pace his cage. Santino raises his hand, his fingers stopping 1 inch from her trembling cheek in a terrifying flex of restraint. Luca stands frozen in that red dress, a brilliant metaphor for the danger trapping her. Her exhausted mind works over him, trying to twist his unhinged rage into some warped form of protection. She actually thinks she caught a massive win because he broke first. But here is the hard truth we must face before it comes. We will invent fake victories just to survive our most crushing defeats. The heavy door clicks shut, leaving her alone in the static. She falsely thinks she holds the cards, totally blind to the fact that his exit was a calculated pause, not a white flag of surrender. The scene cuts to morning light, but the heavy psychological darkness remains suffocating. Luca drags herself downstairs, desperately trying to build an emotional wall. She just wants the quiet comfort of a normal routine. But the second she enters the kitchen, the frequency absolutely drops. Santino leans against the cold marble counter, projecting the dark dominance of a mafia king. He entirely refuses to look at her, save for the slow, brutal clenching of his jaw. Luca catches that tiny movement instantly. It teaches us a brutal lesson about trauma. Extreme fear forces us to memorize small details we should never have to notice. True safety is found in calm waters, not in becoming an expert at predicting a hurricane. She is entirely fluent in his terrifying, unspoken language of silence. Luca approaches the counter, pouring coffee, just to give her shaking hands a physical job. Listen closely to this beat with me. For 8 straight months, the silence in this mansion felt hollow, like two ghosts missing each other in the dark. But today, the vibe is entirely different. The quiet crushes her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. She sits across from him, using the rising steam to avoid losing her mind. Santino slaps his phone face down against the marble. He slowly lifts his gaze and absolutely locks eyes with her. It is intensely terrifying. Sometimes the biggest danger in life comes not from being ignored, but from finally getting noticed by the exact wrong person. The apex predator has officially acknowledged his captive. He stares her down with agonizing slowness, feeding off the crushing psychological weight of his gaze. Luca feels those dark eyes, scanning her messy hair, her exhausted face, and the way she strangles that mug like a shield. For a guy like Santino, simply looking at her is a massive act of dominance. It completely shreds her armor. When he asks if she got any sleep, the sudden sound makes her jump. His tone is crazy soft, which makes it infinitely more terrifying. She mumbles a timid response and asks about his night. Does he answer? Absolutely not. He takes a slow sip of coffee, totally weaponizing the dead air. It reminds us of a deeply bitter truth. Deliberate silence is often the sharpest blade someone can use to completely cut you down. He stands tall, demanding total obedience. That marble island is a physical wall, but the real fortress is everything they refuse to talk about. Stick with me, because you and I can see exactly how insanely toxic this is. Neither brings up the red dress or the unhinged tension from the library. By starving her of closure, Santino traps Luca's inside her spiraling mind, letting her anxiety do his emotional violence for him. He casually adjusts his cuffs and walks out the door. It forces us to swallow a devastating truth. The things people consciously withhold often wreck us way harder than the insults they scream out loud. Luca stays frozen, drowning in his calculated absence. Then the camera whips over to the gritty streets of Chicago, where a black sedan rolls into a dark alley outside a hidden mob club. This restaurant is basically a high-stakes war zone, disguised by crisp tablecloths and expensive wine. Santino steps into the freezing night and pulls off a move totally out of character. He opens Luca's door himself. She visibly flinches, freezing in the shadows before reluctantly handing over her fingers. His skin feels like absolute ice. There is zero affection in the way his knuckles lock down around her hand. It is a territorial warning to every predator inside. He is announcing to the underworld that she is his new chess piece. She feels the hollow emptiness of his grip, but walks beside him anyway. It exposes a seriously tragic truth. Sometimes our fear of standing alone is so massive that we will willingly hold the hand of the exact monster who ruined our lives. The air inside this private dining room is suffocating, choked with heavy cigar smoke and unhinged danger. 6 brutal men circle the table like starving sharks. These are elite criminals who calculate human value by the price of a targeted hit. Santino guides Luca to his right side, pressing his palm into her shoulder to establish absolute ownership. Check out how fast her body language shifts under the dim lights. Her survival instincts snatch the wheel. She slaps on the hollow mask of the silent, obedient wife, dishing out empty responses to their questions. We learn a dark lesson about human preservation here. When you find yourself trapped in a room full of wolves, the smartest strategy is to smile and pretend you cannot see the fresh blood dripping from their teeth. For 40 agonizing minutes, Luca plays her part to perfection. Then this scarred boss across the table decides to poke the bear. He flashes a sickening smile, cracking a filthy joke about how well Santino polishes his property. An ugly chuckle ripples across the dark room. It is the worst sound, dangerous men bonding over disrespect. Luca instantly feels burning heat flood her cheeks. The desperate instinct to reclaim her dignity rises violently in her throat. But before she can fight back, Santino slices through the tension. It shows us how deeply fake protection can wound. Pride is fragile, but having your voice erased by the guy claiming to protect you is the ultimate violation. Let us be honest. He silences the table strictly to defend his own massive ego, never her honor. The camera slows down for this cinematic beat. You and I have been watching the shadows long enough to appreciate how cold this is. Santino never yells, nor does his icy face twitch. He simply wraps his fingers around his crystal glass and slowly squeezes until it violently shatters into his bare palm. Dark crimson wine splashes across the white linen, perfectly mirroring fresh blood. Every single mobster in that room forgets how to breathe. He drops the jagged shards and speaks in a dead whisper, commanding the boss to never disrespect his property again. It highlights a deeply tragic life lesson. Toxic individuals will fight fiercely for you, not because they demand absolute ownership of your heart, but because they demand absolute ship of your life. He is not saving her. He is just guarding his prized trophy. The older boss turns pale, dropping his gaze in total submission. The brutal hierarchy is restored in seconds, but we must analyze Luca's reaction to the silence. For days, her traumatized mind endlessly loops that violent act. She fixates on the red wine staining his palm, and her broken psychology twists the narrative. She actually convinces herself he was willing to bleed to keep her safe. It proves how desperately the human spirit searches for light. We will paint our worst nightmares in beautiful colors just to survive sleeping through them. This romanticized delusion becomes the thick chain holding her down. Then, the sterile silence of her cage is shattered. Her chaotic best friend Tavi practically kicks the massive front door wide open, dragging real life back into that cold house. Picture the scene. The heavy, suffocating air of that mafia estate is suddenly shattered. Tavi crashes through the doors like a midnight storm, slamming takeout bags down. She doesn't hold back, tearing into Luca for freezing over a simple choice, a painful reminder of how captivity has fractured Luca's mind. But then, a sound breaks the gloom. Luca laughs. A real, honest laugh. For a fleeting second, the cold walls melt, but you and I know how this world works. Freedom is a ghost. Right on cue, the shadows bleed into the shape of Beck, the massive head of security. He stands there, arms crossed, staring at Tavi with the dead eyes of a prison warden. It reminds us of a hard truth. We have to fiercely guard those fleeting moments of joy because the dark is always waiting to swallow them back up. The moment Beck speaks, the temperature in the room plummets. He doesn't look at Tavi like she is a person. To him, she is just a loud error code in his ordered system. But Tavi refuses to be intimidated. She bites back with pure venom, asking the giant if he needs to go plug into a wall outlet, basically calling him a machine to his face. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Beck does not blink. He holds her gaze with empty eyes, monotonously reciting his sleep schedule before melting back into the dark hallway. But in that crushing silence, Luca catches something. A tiny, almost invisible twitch in Beck's jaw. It is a quiet reminder for all of us. No matter how deep you bury your emotions beneath a heart of stone, your true humanity will always find a crack to bleed through. Let us look closely at what happens next. Tavi spins the encounter into a dark joke, muttering that a 12-second chat with the cyborg is basically a marriage commitment. Luca lets out another genuine laugh, and for one fragile moment, the nightmare of being a captive mafia bride washes away. But isolation is a patient hunter. Hours later, the mansion falls dead quiet. Luca pulls out a hidden phone, secretly reaching out to her brother Lazzaro. He is living off the grid, surviving on ghost money the syndicate has not traced yet. He is her only lifeline in the dark. Think about how heavy that is. Sometimes, when your entire world is caving in, clutching on to one invisible thread of hope is the single thing keeping your sanity from completely shattering. The memory shifts, dragging us into the ashes of her past. After their mother died, Luca became an unbreakable shield for her brother, Rav. She built a fortress of lies to pretend the mob violence was not breaking her. When Rav's voice crackles through the phone, asking if she is okay, it hits her chest like a train. So, she does the only thing she can. She cuts the call dead. It feels cold, but she must keep those lethal men away from her 19-year-old brother. Across the room, Tavi watches. Recognizing that shared trauma, Tavi softly asks if he is safe. Luca forces back her tears and simply nods. It teaches us a tough lesson. Sometimes the absolute bravest thing you can do is lock your deepest agony behind a mask of stone just to survive one more night. She hides the phone, forcing the crushing anxiety of her brother's survival into the darkest corner of her mind. The days simply melt together, replaced by a heavy silence that swallows the mansion. It is that terrifying midnight quiet where the ticking of a clock drives you insane. Her trauma fuels a relentless insomnia, dragging her out of bed to get water and calm her racing heart. The ground floor is pitch black. Santino, the ruthless boss, demands total darkness while he plots. The only thing piercing the gloom is a single, wicked sliver of yellow light creeping from under his heavy study door. It is a chilling reminder of how the human brain works. Your mind will never allow you to truly rest when you are trapped in a constant state of pure survival. You and I have both felt that icy grip of terror in the dark, right? Luca creeps toward the study, her bare feet freezing against the floorboards. The door is cracked just enough for Santino's dark voice to bleed into the hall. Every instinct inside her is screaming to run. After 8 months trapped in this empire, she knows you never spy on a mafia boss. But the curiosity is too overwhelming. She presses her back against the cold wall, barely taking a breath. And the strangest part? There is no yelling. The terrifying pauses tell her he is dead silent, listening to whoever is on the other end of the line. Take this quiet moment to heart. True fear does not just paralyze you in the dark. Sometimes, it forces you to wake up and pay close attention to the lethal danger walking standing right in front of you. Let's sit in this room for a second, you and me. The silence bleeding out of that phone speaker is heavy enough to crush bone. Santino stands there in the dim light, letting a single name drop from his lips twice. Silas. His tone sinks into this pitch-black, hollow space that makes the room feel freezing. Luca is completely in the dark. She doesn't know a thing about Silas or why the name carries so much pure venom. But trauma is a strange teacher. When you are trapped, your brain turns into a sponge. Her survival instincts snap awake, burning those 5 letters into her mind right as a heavy click rings off the dark mahogany desk. It's a hard truth about living in the shadows. Sometimes, the dangerous secrets you quietly collect are the only weapons that will keep you breathing. She takes a quick, blind step backward, just praying the shadows will swallow her whole. Instead, her shoulder hits something hard, a solid, immovable chest. Santino is right there behind her. There was absolutely no sound, no creak of the floorboards, no shift of fabric, nothing. The man materialized out of the dark like a bad memory, knocking every ounce of air out of her lungs. His voice rolls over her shoulder, low and rough, asking her what she's doing out of bed. The question sends a violent shiver down her spine. She stammers out some weak lie about needing a glass of water, her heart practically hammering out of her chest. She refuses to turn around, letting his sharp, bitter cologne fill the space between them. It teaches you something real about fear. The monsters we spend our whole lives running from are usually the ones standing quietly at our backs. The air between them turns to absolute concrete, heavy, and waiting for a spark. He reaches out and loosely wraps his in slowness. He reaches out and loosely wraps his fingers around her wrist. He doesn't squeeze. It's not a physical trap. It's a quiet, psychological test. He is reading her racing pulse. His skin against hers feels like a lit match, burning hot in the freezing hallway. That touch barely lasts a single heartbeat, but it sends a brutal shock straight up her arm. Worse, it confirms the one thing she was terrified of. He feels the exact same dark, undeniable pull that she does. Without breathing a single word, he lets his hand fall and melts away in the blackness of the corridor. She stands there, totally rooted to the floor. It is a quiet reminder for all of us. Sometimes, the smallest, most silent fractions of a second are the ones that completely rewrite our fate. With those heavy secrets burning a hole in her mind, sleep is just a forgotten concept. Days bleed away, and soon a vicious storm is ripping through Chicago. Wind screams past the mansion, throwing sheets of freezing rain against the massive glass windows. Luca sits rigid in her chair, eyes locked on an open book, though she hasn't read a single word in over an hour. Over the roar of the thunder, the heavy grind of the metal security gates echoes from the driveway. In their brutal world, moving in the dead of night is just how the ugly work gets done. Santino and Beck live out there in the dark, and she knows better than to ask questions she doesn't want the answers to. It's a painful reality we all have to face eventually. The people holding the keys will always keep you blind and guessing, because keeping you confused is exactly how they keep you caged. Before Santino even stepped foot out the door, the tension radiating off him was absolutely suffocating. Luca watched him leave with Beck, tracking the hard, rigid line of his jaw and the tension in his broad shoulders. He looked like a wolf stepping out into the snow, fully to tear something apart. Now the storm continues to batter the glass, and the minutes crawl by like hours. She tosses under the blankets, lying to herself that her insomnia has nothing to do with waiting for him to come back. Letting your heart bleed for someone dangerous is a tragic mistake, and it is a hard lesson you usually only learn after you are already bleeding. She cannot afford to care. But right at 11, the harsh screech of the perimeter alarms completely shatters the night, freezing every single drop of blood in her veins. Panic tears through the quiet house like a lit fuse, Outside, tires scream violently across the wet concrete, doors slam, and men who usually fear nothing are shouting over the rain. A cold, heavy dread crashes into Luca. She kicks away the heavy blankets and races barefoot down the freezing marble staircase. When she finally bursts into the garage, the sight is a nightmare. Beck is struggling under Santino's dead weight. The man is dragging a leg, his hand clamped hard over his ribs as thick, dark crimson spills down his crisp white shirt. The floor falls out from under her stomach, but instead of breaking down, she completely shuts off. We are defined by who we become in the exact second the world falls apart. She swallows the rising terror, locking her face into a mask of pure shattered glass, and steps directly into the fire. Sit with me for a second, because this is the exact heartbeat where the power shifts. Beck tries to brush off the nightmare like a simple scratch. But look at Santino. The untouchable king is drowning in cold sweat. He tries to project authority, but the tremor in his voice gives him away. Luca shatters the act, pointing at the dark pool of blood on the concrete. Without hesitating, Beck slides her shoulder under Santino's good arm, taking his heavy weight. The shock in his eyes is raw, a lone wolf, paralyzed because someone actually wants to save him. It proves a simple truth. Genuine compassion breaks a hardened man faster than violence ever could. For the first time, he surrenders. As they drag themselves up those dark stairs, their fates are bound together forever. The lens pulls us straight into the suffocating walls of the washroom, locking onto the dark red soaking through Beck's clothes. She moves like a ghost caught in a loop, dragging the wounded mob boss toward the cold porcelain of the bathtub. The heavy oak door clicks shut, the deadbolt ends snapping into place with absolute finality. Under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights, they both look entirely hollowed out. The dead silence in that room only makes the heavy tension skyrocket. She grabs the medical kit she obsessively hid away months ago. It is wild how we try to build tiny safe zones when our lives have been hijacked. You and I can probably relate to that, honestly. When your world goes up in flames, clinging to a single predictable routine is often the only way to survive the chaos without losing your mind. The bullet only grazed Santino's shoulder, leaving a brutal cut deep across the muscle. You can practically see the heavy tension drain right out of Beck. She tries so hard to maintain an ice-cold armor, but her sheer relief gives her away instantly. Drenching a cotton pad in antiseptic, she murmurs that it will burn. He does not even blink. Staring at the blank wall, his jaw set in stone, he drops a line about surviving much worse. Total defensive ego. Beck ignores the posturing. Her hands move like clockwork, a quiet tragedy proving she had to learn how to mend dangerous men far too early in her youth. It is a harsh truth to swallow. Sometimes, to fix the shattered people standing right in front of us, we have to numb our own bleeding wounds just to make it through the bitter night. The air in that washroom grows incredibly heavy, pressing down on them with a silence that feels like it could shatter bone. Neither dares to make a sound. Santino sits entirely rigid, treating his torn shoulder like it belongs to a stranger. Beck is completely lost in the rhythm, stitching his flesh with the steady hands of a survivor. Once closed, she pivots to the sink, scrubbing the red stains from her trembling fingers. It is a haunting sight, as if she is desperately trying to wash the underground violence out of her soul. She catches his reflection in the mirror, tracing the brutal scars across his chest, and whispers that he will live. But here is the real lesson. Just because you survive the terror of the night does not mean you have escaped the monsters living inside your own head. The lens lingers on Santino's hollow eyes. Men raised in his dark underworld do not understand gratitude. To them, every favor is just a blood debt waiting to be collected. When he finally forces out a rough thank you, the words sound like crushed glass. Moving purely on instinct, Beck bends to lift his heavy coat from the floor, and everything suddenly shifts. A single piece of paper slips quietly from the pocket. It falls in slow motion, landing face up to reveal a frantic note signed with a solitary letter. The letter S. This is the exact moment the game turns deadly. You and I must remember this truth. The deepest secrets we bury to protect ourselves are almost always the very things that detonate, destroying whatever fragile piece we manage to build. Just look closely at that handwritten note. 3 damning details are scrawled across the page. Amato, Dock 9, 11 at night. You can watch the warmth completely drain from Beck's face as the awful truth clicks into place. She remembers Santino quietly mentioning the name Silas Amato just days ago. The traitor inside his family is suddenly dragged into the light. Santino remains on the edge of the tub, watching her freeze. He is like a wounded wolf, Houston, studying his prey, calculating her next move. In this suspended second, Beck holds absolute power. She could easily let this crime boss walk blindly into a slaughter, or she could save him. It reminds us that real strength is never about weapons. True power is found in the agonizing choices we make in the dead of night when nobody is watching. Every survival instinct in her body is screaming to hide that paper, to use it as a shield against the man who stole her life. But isolation plays cruel tricks on the mind. It slowly twists our need for safety into a dark loyalty toward the very hands holding us captive. Against all reason, Beck steps forward and holds the traitor's note out to him. Santino takes it, his dark eyes turning entirely to ice as he studies her pale face. He asks where she found it, searching for any sign of deception. They are the calculated traps of a predator. Beck does not flinch or look away. She stands her ground, meeting his lethal gaze. It is a profound lesson for anyone listening tonight. Sometimes, staring your absolute worst fear directly in the eyes is the only way to break its curse forever. Let us look closely at this shifting dynamic, you and I. Beck speaks the name Silas aloud, her voice carrying a terrifying calm. You can see the mob boss shatter from the inside out. For 3 agonizing seconds, Santino entirely forgets to breathe. His jaw locks as the weight of the betrayal crushes the air right out of his lungs. A heavy sigh escapes him. A quiet confession that his own blood arranged the massacre. When Beck demands to know what comes next, the entire gravity of the room shifts instantly. The way he looks at her transforms completely. It is raw, unmasked respect. Life has a brutal way of stripping away our carefully crafted armor. For the very first time in this dark saga, he is no longer staring at a helpless prisoner. He is looking into the eyes of a true equal. Beck has fully crossed the invisible line, stepping willingly into the crosshairs of his violent world. Santino whispers that he will handle it tomorrow, his tone so violently flat it sends a shiver down the spine. It is a stone-cold death warrant for Silas, delivered with chilling ease. Outside, a furious thunderstorm is battering the city windows, a perfect mirror for the silent chaos tearing them apart inside. Santino forces his battered body up, kicks the heavy door wide, and walks straight out into the freezing deluge. He desperately needs that icy pain just to feel anything beyond the sting of betrayal. We all do that sometimes, and running headfirst into the storm just to drown out the echoes in our own minds. And Beck, bound by trauma, she simply follows him into the howling dark. The bitter rain washes over them in sheets, mixing with the dark blood seeping from Santino's shoulder, but Beck remains completely still. Over the roar of the wind, he asks the one question hanging between them. He knows she could have used that paper to tear his criminal empire to the ground. So why surrender it? The silence stretches on. Beck scrambles for a reason desperately trying to believe she simply did the decent thing. But there is a much heavier truth buried here. When a person is starved for real connection, they will gladly drink poison if it is offered from a warm hand. It is a tragic flaw. We will surrender our own freedom just to anchor ourselves to another person's storm. That is the beautifully agonizing reality of the human heart, stripped down to its core. "Because I live in this house," she finally answers, her voice trembling violently against the cold. With those 7 words, the entire master and captive illusion crumbles into dust. Santino leans forward through the freezing downpour and rests his heavy forehead directly against hers. Just watch how the world stops spinning for them in this frame. This is not romance. This is 2 bleeding souls colliding just to survive the freezing night. He whispers into the rain that he has absolutely no idea what to do with her. Think about the weight of that. The most feared man on the streets is entirely paralyzed by his own heart. It is a quiet reminder that all the ruthless control in the world cannot save you from your own untamed feelings. It is a terrifying, beautiful surrender of power. You know her chest is tight with panic, yet she stays completely anchored to his broken frame. She closes her eyes against a stormy curtain, letting her entire existence tether to this wounded mafia boss. She tells him in a faint whisper to take things slowly. It is a tragic kind of bravery, pretending she has any say in the orbit of this destructive force. But in our darkest moments, we all cling to those fragile illusions of control just to keep from drowning in the chaos. Santino lingers for one agonizing, endless second before he finally pulls back, severing that raw magnetic pull. He fades into the shadows of the estate, leaving Beck utterly alone in the howling wind. The truth hits her like physical blow. The old boundaries are dead, and there is no safe way home from here. Let me tell you something, my friends. No rational thought will ever break the agonizing grip of a trauma bond once it sinks its teeth into your soul. The storm lashes at the glass all night, and Beck lies awake, her chest tangled in a maddening web of sheer terror and desperate longing. When morning breaks, she drags herself to the long dining room and completely freezes. For 8 long months, Santino kept a massive fortress of files and ledgers stacked between them on that wood. Today, the table is entirely bare. We all need to hear this lesson. You never truly see a person until the comfortable distractions are ripped away. Every single barrier is gone now. He sits at the far end, motionless in the morning light, tracking her every breath with a dark, consuming fire. Picture Beck creeping through this painfully quiet room, pouring her black coffee exactly like she has 100 times before. Every muscle is pulled tight. She is basically standing there, waiting for a bomb to go off. But instead, the boss shatters the silence with a complete curveball. He admits he was cruel to her. His voice is just this deep, dangerous rumble in the dark. He will not even look her in the eye, just spinning his mug with those scarred hands. A mafia kingpin who built his empire on fear, suddenly spilling his guts to his captive. Beck grips her cup, shutting her eyes as the apology hits her. It brings up a tough life lesson. Sometimes the absolute deadliest weapon a toxic person can pull on you is not a threat, but a sudden, perfectly timed flash of vulnerability. Imagine the camera zooming right in on her face, catching the absolute mental gymnastics happening behind her tired eyes. A tiny, broken part of her wants to snatch up this crumb of validation and fix their messed up bond. But 8 months of total ice has turned her heart into pure steel. She is not letting one little speech wipe away the damage. She looks right at him and flat out says he caused her severe psychological trauma. Her voice is completely deadpan, ringing hollow through the empty room. She lists out every single horrible thing he did, from the lonely dinners to treating her like a total ghost. He finally stops spinning the mug and looks up, and it leaves us with a heavy life lesson. Sometimes your most untouchable, savage level of strength only kicks in after you have had absolutely everything ripped away from you. You and I can practically feel the insane tension rolling off the boss right now. Look at that muscle twitching in his jaw. We are basically watching a cornered tiger trying to build a wall against his own feelings. But then an absolute shocker happens. He actually forces himself to sit there and take the hit. He lets her brutal words sink in without fighting back. She stands her ground, making it crystal clear that a quick sorry is not magically fixing the nightmare he dragged her into. She wants time. We are talking brutal, agonizing amounts of time. Let us take a crucial life lesson from this heavy room. Real healing does not kick off with some lazy, half-baked apology. It requires both sides to sit down and chew on the ugly truth until things actually change. He just looks at her, eyes dark, and says he registers her input. The words hit the floor like concrete blocks. There is no dramatic speech, no fake promises about him suddenly being a good guy. But to a girl who has been treated like a shadow for months, even this basic drop of respect feels like a rush. They finish their coffee in this insanely tense quiet. Of course, in their world, peace never lasts. By 2 in the afternoon, their whole reality gets flipped upside down. The heavy rumble of armored trucks starts shaking the windows as armed hitmen flood the compound, ready to drop bodies. It hits us with a harsh life lesson. No matter how deep you bury your head in the sand, the dark consequences of your past are eventually going to kick your front door wide open. So they frame her totally alone at the top of these massive stairs, swallowed by the dark. Meanwhile, straight down below her, the local crime bosses are packing into a grimy basement. It is literally hell bubbling right under this fancy mansion. The only thing separating her fake safe zone from their bloody mob business is one heavy steel door. A massive enforcer is guarding the hall like a literal gargoyle. Left out, she sits on the freezing steps, completely ghosted in her own house. She can hear these aggressive, muffled voices leaking up through the floorboards. She cannot catch the exact words, but she feels the terrifying shift in their tone. It brings up a brutal life lesson. Trauma literally wires your brain to feel the hurricane coming just from a tiny drop in pressure. The tension kicks off with the dawn talking from the cellar in this smooth, freezing voice. It is that terrifying chill of a guy who can snap his fingers and end you. His 52-year-old right-hand man replies with a dead, empty tone. But then, absolute chaos breaks loose. Shouts explode out of nowhere, pure rage, crashing through the floorboards. The heavy basement door finally rips open with an awful screech. The enforcer steps out first, casting a massive shadow. Right behind him is Silas Amato. The camera catches every drop of sweat pouring down his ghost-white face. His eyes are going crazy with the panic of a guy who knows he is completely cooked. It leaves us with a heavy life lesson. True guilt crushes your soul and body long before the punishment actually hits you. Let us pause and take in how wild this moment is. 2 huge guys drag Silas out to the courtyard, basically marching a dead man walking through the dark. He is staring blankly at the floor, totally missing her, watching him from the stairs. She takes in every pathetic step, feeling this sick combo of relief and horror. Then, the boss steps out of the shadows. He casually fixes his perfectly clean sleeve, which is such a terrifying flex of casual power. He turns around and locks those pitch-black eyes right onto hers. For 3 massive seconds, the room goes dead silent. He gives her a cold little head tilt, officially sealing their twisted deal. Here is your life lesson for today. When you choose to shake hands with the devil, you are signing up to carry his sins too. Let us break this crazy scene down. The basement door slams shut with a massive boom that literally shakes the stairs. It is basically the sound of a blood pact, locking away all that insane violence from the fancy house. She is stuck on the step, completely paralyzed. Her heart rate drops to this creepy ice-cold rhythm. Just by handing over one piece of paper, she basically deleted a guy from existence, but feels absolutely nothing. Silas tried to flatline the boss, and she was the one digging out the bullets. But now, she is rationalizing a full-blown execution without even blinking. This brings us to a dark life lesson. When you are shoved into a corner where survival is your only option, your brain will easily trade in your whole moral compass just to see the next sunrise. Jump ahead 24 hours later. The whole mansion goes dead quiet. The hitmen have vanished into thin air, even only for the leftovers and a note meant only for the boss's wife. Now pay attention to this detail. You see this sad, twisted little smile creeping onto her face. She is starting to embrace the exact same cage she tried so hard to break out of. Santino posts up in the kitchen, pouring heavy red wine and sliding the glass across the granite. They pull up tall chairs, sitting so close their knees are practically brushing. This intense, quiet vibe freaks her out way more than gunshots ever did. It gives us a real-life lesson. Sometimes the softest, quietest moments in our lives are the exact things that crack through our thickest armor. That red wine starts doing its magic, melting down the iron defenses of the Mafia King. By round 2, the crazy tension turns into this super fragile vibe. Santino completely ignores the literal blood still staining his hands. His deep voice echoes as he breaks down the mob meeting he just had. He leans right in and tells her that he stood in front of a bunch of killers and told them she was not some shiny trophy, but his personal choice. Boom, her heart basically catches fire. She squeezes that glass so hard her knuckles go pure white, just fighting to hide how badly she is shaking. It drops a heavy life lesson on us. No matter how much trauma you have survived, even the most damaged hearts are secretly starving to be genuinely chosen by someone. The camera zooms in to catch this absolute masterclass of a plot twist. The boss, a guy who usually looks like a stone statue, is suddenly dropping his guard completely. It is like watching a hitman hand over his gun. When she asks him about all the rival mobsters in that room, he just says he was never asking for their permission. A breathless laugh just rips right out of her. In return, the smallest hint of a smile tugs at his mouth. She latches onto that tiny smirk like it is a lifesaver in the ocean. And guys, here is a serious life lesson. When you have been starved for real affection, it is terrifyingly easy to mistake a guy simply putting down his weapon for actual, genuine love. Without another sound, their shadows merge as they head up those massive stairs together. You and I are about to unpack a literal masterclass in mafia manipulation. These two are gliding up the grand staircase, totally synced in this crazy trauma bond. Santino leads her straight into the master bedroom. Desperate for warmth, she gets the huge stone fireplace roaring. Boom! Santino shuts the heavy door. The latch clicks loud, but it's instead of hearing a prison cell slam shut. This girl actually thinks he is locking the bad guys out. He leans against the wood, looking untouchable in the firelight. She stares into his dark eyes, totally convinced the ruthless Don is finally dropping his guard. But listen up. The simple life lesson here is that a trap is still a deadly trap, even when the predator lines it with velvet and calls it a safe house. Dim the lights for this one. Feel the air leave the room. The sheer gravity of him standing there is enough to crush her ribs. Santino steps back from the door, the floorboards groaning under the weight of his boots. Her ears ring so violently she cannot tell if it is his heavy steps or her own frantic heartbeat. He has her backed into a corner, completely out of options. He plays his cruelest card. He lifts a scarred hand, tracing the soft line of her jaw, letting his thumb rest against her trembling lips. It is a touch so gentle. It masks the absolute trap she is in. Listen to me. The saddest lesson you can learn is this. True cruelty is not an iron cage. It is a manipulator spinning the web so beautifully. You actually end up begging for the lock. It is agonizing to watch her surrender. She tips her trembling chin upward, offering a kiss, desperate to maintain the illusion that she still has a choice. Santino meets her halfway, pausing with this perfectly calculated hesitation, making it seem like he is the one holding back. But it is a trap. He slides his heavy hand to the nape of her neck, sealing her fate. She clings to his shirt, feeling the rapid drum of his heart beneath the fabric, and tragically mistakes that rhythm for love. But that is not affection beating in his chest. It is the raw rush of the hunter finally sinking his teeth into the prey. The lesson here is quiet but brutal. Never mistake the destructive heat of a wildfire for the comforting warmth of a hearth. It will only leave your spirit entirely in ashes. The sheer control he wields over her is heartbreaking. Santino grips her waist and effortlessly lifts her off the floor. Her feet dangle in the empty air, completely powerless against the city's most dangerous phantom. Yet, instead of fighting, she wraps her arms around his neck, clinging to the very architect of her ruin. He carries her to the mattress, pinning her with a terrifying, deliberate gentleness. Staring into the endless dark of his eyes, she hallucinates a flicker of vulnerability. She believes she is seeing a wounded soul, while he only sees a beautiful new possession. It brings us to a harsh truth. When you have been starving for a single drop of warmth, your mind will paint the darkest monster in vibrant hues just to survive the freezing night. And just like that, the velvet trap snaps shut. Santino lowers his voice to a dark whisper, asking if she is truly sure. It is the ultimate sleight of hand, offering an open door to a bird whose wings he already clipped. Trembling, she confesses that after 8 months of agony, surrendering to him feels like her only salvation. He pulls her flush against his chest, stripping away her defenses with the cold efficiency of a man who already owns her soul. She shivers, tragically believing this architect of violence is the only one who truly sees her. Here is a lesson that echoes in the dark. True ruin does not come from a physical blow. The absolute destruction of a person happens when they are convinced they only exist as a reflection in their captor's eyes. Let us pause for a second, you and I. We have to tear down this romantic illusion and look at the freezing reality beneath it. Her shaking hands clumsily unbutton his dark shirt, her mind twisting a deep trauma response into a tender exchange. She traces the fresh bandage wrapped around his shoulder. Santino presses her palm against his ruined skin, quietly selling the devastating lie that they are just two broken pieces fitting perfectly together. But look at his eyes. They scan her with the cold calculation of a kingpin counting his wealth. It is a vital lesson to learn. We will blind ourselves to the most dangerous warnings, simply because a beautiful lie hurts far less than a lonely truth. This is not romance. It is absolute subjugation wrapped in velvet. Notice how he uses his sheer physical presence, the heavy gravity of his body, to crush her final psychological walls. That breathless tension? Those are not butterflies. Those are the invisible chains of trauma holding her down. He drops the slick facade, his voice turning raw and heavy as he commands her to look at him. It is a brilliant, terrifying manipulation. He makes her feel utterly chosen in a world where she is merely a pawn. Trapping her against the sheets, he buries his face in the crook of her neck with a ragged groan, offering the smallest crumb of vulnerability to secure her loyalty. Keep this simple truth close to your heart. Real love is meant to unlock the door and let you fly. If you are sitting inside a diamond-studded cage, you are still a prisoner. Every single beat of this moment is dictated by his twisted rhythm. He moves with an agonizing slowness, forcing her panicked, shallow breaths to match the calm, steady pulse of a killer. Shadows dance wildly across the walls as she strokes his tense shoulders, entirely convinced she holds the magic to heal this deeply fractured man. He rests his forehead against hers, whispering a dark promise that he will never let her walk away. That is not a vow of eternal devotion. It is a receipt of ownership. The moment she breathes back her surrender, her past and future turn to ash. This brings a bitter lesson to the surface. Giving up your voice does not purchase a soulmate. It only buys you a very quiet place to be forgotten, swallowed whole by the villain you tried to save. The air settles, and the silence that follows is the sound of the final lock turning on her freedom. She closes her eyes as sensory overload completely shorts out her frayed nerves. Beside her, Santino finally lets the icy armor of the dawn fall away, his rigid muscles collapsing into the messy sheets. The dying embers of the fire cast heavy, mournful shadows across the room. He reaches out, slowly brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. Looking at him, she falsely believes this ruthless tyrant has finally surrendered to love. But here is a lesson we all must learn. No one actually wins when a spirit is hijacked. He slipped past her emotional walls, locked her deep in his own dark basement, and handed her a hollow crown so she would never realize she was caught. You and I have to look closely at the beautiful wreckage of her mind right now. The psychological twist is staggering. Santino pulls her close, his voice a low, gravelly rasp as he swears she is never leaving his side. And her response? She softly traces the hard line of his jaw, willingly signing away her autonomy. The massive, silent mansion surrounds them, severing her completely from the world. She lies there, listening to the slow heartbeat of the very man who orchestrated her nightmare, and a quiet smile touches her lips. She falls asleep, believing she has found sanctuary. Let this be a warning, a profound lesson for the lonely. Sometimes the greatest threat to your soul is not the storm raging outside, but the warm, deceptive fire burning right inside your own prison. Morning breaks, washing the cold ashes of the fireplace in pale sunlight. Santino is already gone, but the heavy sheets beside her still carry his warmth. She sits up, the rich scent of dark roast coffee drifting up from somewhere in this fortress. Then she is swallowed up in his oversized white dress shirt. Think about that. She was unconscious, and he dressed her. It is an immense violation of boundaries, but her fractured mind twists it into an act of quiet devotion. She smiles at the thought of his scarred hands doing up the buttons. The lesson here should shake you awake. When a spirit is deeply bruised, it will gather up a dozen glaring warnings and stitch them together into a beautiful tapestry of false hope. Smiling, she wears her captor's colors. The suffocating dread of the syndicate simply evaporates from her reality. She pads barefoot across the cold marble of the kitchen, her eyes landing on Beck. This man is a hollow vessel, a hitman whose soul checked out years ago. He stands in absolute silence, chewing on a stale pastry swiped from another ruthless enforcer. Beck has the empty, distant stare of a man who has dug far too many graves in the dead of night. He offers no greeting, only slowly raises the pastry in her direction. Yet, in her distorted view, this chilling encounter feels like the comforting embrace of a strange new family. We must carry this lesson forward. Seeking warmth in the shadows of violent people will never drag them into the light. It will only pull you deeper into their pitch-black world. Look at how entirely Lena has surrendered to the illusion. She leans casually against the marble counter, actually teasing Beck about stealing a pastry decorated with a little icing heart. Beck, a man built for absolute ruin, flatly replies that he would rather eat pure sugar than listen to her voice, and she laughs. A genuine, bright sound echoing in a house of killers. She is finding warmth beside men who extinguish lives before the coffee gets cold. But the fragile peace shatters instantly. The air turns thick as Santino ghosts into the doorway. He crosses his massive arms, leaning against the frame, watching her like he owns the very air she breathes. The lesson is hauntingly clear. The devil does not need to drag you down to hell if he can make you comfortable sitting in the flames. Let us step into the shadows together, you and I, and look at the absolute wreckage of a broken heart. Santino stands quiet in the dark, his cold eyes locked onto Lena. She is drowning in his oversized shirt. When she catches his stare, she completely mistakes his dark hunger for affection. She thinks this is just a soft domestic moment. She walks right up, handing him a warm cup. He takes it, making sure his rough fingers drag slowly across hers. It is a calculated move designed to blur her boundaries. She sighs, thinking she finally tamed the brutal mob boss. But he is merely admiring the shiniest possession locked inside his vault. It brings us to a harsh but necessary truth tonight. Real love is a mirror that shows you your true worth, never a cage that keeps you trapped. Beck runs his hands under the freezing water, gives a silent nod, and slips out the back door. He knows the unspoken rule of the underground. The king requires absolute isolation with his prize. The room empties, leaving Santino and Lena alone in a kitchen that felt like an active war zone for 8 brutal months. Today, sunlight pours over the cold marble, painting the illusion of a fresh start. They wander out into the gardens, and Santino drifts right beside her. His knuckles deliberately brush hers, a calculated touch to keep her pulse racing. They pause on the wooden deck, staring out across the black water. It forces us to remember a painful reality about human nature. The absolute most dangerous traps we will ever walk into are the ones painted to look exactly like welcoming open doors. We move to the heavy doors of his private study, where the mind games reach a terrifying level. Lena pushes the door open without knocking, wearing a hopeful smile. She genuinely believes she has earned a seat at his table. Santino sits behind his desk, the true nerve center of his violent empire. The second he spots her, he cuts his phone call dead, offering her a look of undivided respect. She sinks into the leather chair, boldly stating that they need to talk. Warmth hits her cheeks because she finally feels like an equal partner instead of a helpless captive. But she is entirely blind to the invisible strings tied to her wrists. It is a brutal wake-up call and a vital lesson for every single one of us. Never make the tragic mistake of confusing the length of your leash for actual, genuine freedom. Pay close attention, because you and I are watching the ultimate breaking point. She leans forward and whispers the name of her younger brother, Lazaro. For 8 agonizing months, she kept that boy hidden to keep him off this monster's radar. But right now, she places his life directly into Santino's hands, mistaking her emotional exhaustion for actual trust. Watch the shadows shift in the boss's eyes. It takes him less than a heartbeat to respond, but in that tiny window, his mask completely shatters. A flash of pure, unfiltered murder crosses his features before he buries it again. It is a chilling sight that leaves us with a heavy truth tonight. Sometimes, our desperately lonely need to blindly trust someone is the exact thing that hands them a loaded weapon. We are witnessing the exact tragic second a trauma bond takes root. Lena starts shaking when she catches that terrifying crack in his polished armor. But Santino smooths it over so fast it makes your stomach drop, his voice lowering into a warm, comforting rumble. Her eyes dart frantically across his jaw, searching for the ruthless killer she knows is in there. Instead, she only finds that dark, hypnotic stare he uses to paralyze his targets. In real time, her mind starts building excuses for him. She tells herself he is just a stressed man carrying a heavy crown. It is wild how we will paint angel wings on a demon just to survive a bad dream. It brings us to a crucial life lesson. Muting the screaming alarms of your own intuition is always the very first step toward your own destruction. The camera pulls back as Santino rises, offering his hand with a welcoming gesture. When his fingers wrap around her grip, it is perfectly measured. The dim glow catches the quiet terror in her wide eyes. It hits her that these exact same hands brutally end the lives of rival crime lords, yet they hold her wrist like it is made of delicate glass. He floods her brain with silent violence and follows it with a fake, intoxicating gentleness. They step out into the stone foyer. While the sunset, the stone foyer bruises to a dark purple. It teaches us a deeply profound lesson about the human heart. The saddest tragedy of all is a broken soul completely confusing a tightening chokehold for a safe, warm, and protective embrace. We get a sweeping shot of their dark silhouettes standing by the water. Out in the thick fog, the iron gates of the estate loom like prison bars, topped with a giant stone hawk with pinned wings. 8 months ago, she stood shivering in a plain white dress, staring at that stone bird and knowing she was buried alive. This place was a literal fortress, run by a king who treated her like stolen property. But a human mind can only endure so much raw terror before it finally breaks. A sad piano melody drifts in as she looks up at those iron bars today and actually feels a sick sense of relief. It is a brutal lesson about the lengths we go to survive. When you cannot break the lock on your cage, your broken mind protects you by pretending you asked for the bars. Let us lean in close together. The camera pushes right up to Lena's fingers as she twists her heavy gold wedding band. For 8 months, spinning that ring was her quiet rebellion. But watch her hands right now. Her fingers suddenly stop. The gold band did not shrink. The fight inside her just bled out. Her shoulders slump as she surrenders to her hostage reality. Santino slides his massive fingers between hers, swallowing her hand entirely. The very same palm that orders midnight executions is now softly rubbing her knuckles like a devoted husband. It is a devastating picture of complete mental defeat. It leaves us with a stark warning for our own lives. The deadliest poison in the world is always the one perfectly disguised to taste exactly like a cure. We follow her empty stare back up to that stone bird. The sky fades to black, but the statue does not send shivers down her spine anymore. The eerie tension dissolves into a tragic, gentle lullaby. Her shattered mind has rewritten the story, transforming her toxic warden into a protector. She rests her head against Santino's chest, convincing herself this is the romance she always wanted. She believes she is staying out of loyalty, blind to the iron chains dragging her to the bottom of the lake. This is the ultimate victory for a manipulator, getting the captive to lock the cell door from the inside. It exposes a chilling truth about human nature. We all possess a terrifying habit of deeply romanticizing the exact things that are slowly destroying us. The beautiful illusion finally shatters. The screen flashes as Lena's shaking hands pull a hidden contract from the black ink. The camera spells out her name. Line 1 spells out her name. Line 2 holds a single world-ending word. Transfer. The quiet is broken only by her ragged breathing. Just weeks ago, Santino paraded her around like a queen. But while she slept peacefully in his bed, he was quietly selling her to Arsen Korvek to settle an old blood debt. The psychological whiplash is devastating. She slides down the cold wall, choking on the ultimate betrayal. It leaves us with a harsh reality about trusting toxic people. To a truly ruthless player, never a living, breathing human being. You are just another chip pushed across a bloody poker table. The screen cuts to black right as she hits rock bottom. But stick with me, because this preview is nothing compared to the carnage waiting in the second file. If you thought this was a sad heartbreak story, you are dead wrong. Lena is about to wake up and become an absolute menace. The way she snaps and flips the script on these bosses is simply too wild for the censors here. If you want to see her raw, unfiltered revenge, hit the link in the pinned comment. I am obsessed with watching a broken pawn transform into a nightmare for the kings. Thanks for walking through the dark with me today, and I want you to remember this simple truth before you go. When people force you down into the pitch black, sometimes that is the exact moment you finally learn how to see clearly.